So you would later return to Beijing as ambassador from 1991 to 1995. After having played an active role in normalization, when you returned, it was also during another pivotal period. So this was the aftermath of the 1989 Tiananmen crackdown and the oncoming collapse of the Soviet Union. How did these events affect U.S.-China relations and your role as ambassador?
Enormously, enormously. The first big problem was the lingering effect of the crackdown in Tiananmen Square in June of 1989.
Right.
It had essentially destroyed support for a constructive relationship with China in the United States. President Bush, the first President Bush, had been head of the liaison office in Beijing, and from 1974 to 75, and he was proud of the fact that he had become president of the United States, and he looked forward to having a closer relationship with China. But Tiananmen made that impossible. He was untouchable on foreign policy issues because he had been our representative at the United Nations and had one of the best grasps of international relations of any of our post-World War II presidents. Eisenhower, Nixon, and George Herbert Walker Bush are the presidents who really had strong backgrounds in foreign affairs and national security affairs. So we had a big problem on our hands. He didn't want to have the relationship destroyed, but the only issue on which he was vulnerable was China. And the Democrats leapt on the China issue as a way of beating up on President Bush. So that made it difficult to be trying to manage the U.S. relationship with China because the president was on the defensive. He wanted to protect the relationship, but at the same time, he recognized that U.S. attitudes on China had turned very negative. So that was the first problem that affected my own role as the new ambassador to Beijing. The second problem was that our breakthrough to China had been made possible by our respective concerns about the Soviet threat. And from 1971 until 1989, we had essentially based our new relationship on our common concerns about dealing with the Soviet Union. And all of a sudden, in 1991, the Soviet Union was collapsing. In fact, I was delivering my credentials as ambassador to the president of China when the demonstrations, the coup was taking place in Moscow against Gorbachev in August of 1991. And we were both discussing that situation based on CNN news reports. We'd both been watching CNN, and that was the basis for the information we had available. But the problem was that with the Soviet threat gone, the underpinning for the strategic rationale for the relationship was no longer there. So you had a hostile change in attitudes toward China in the United States, and you had a removal of the strategic underpinning for the relationship. So Americans, and that includes government officials, didn't know what type of relationship we wanted with China. And this made it very awkward for an ambassador in Beijing because American officials were afraid to visit China because they were afraid that they would be criticized for going there. And therefore, we had to move very cautiously in order to try to start rebuilding the relationship on a different basis than the Soviet threat. And that took time, and I was there at the early stages of this process. In fact, by the end of the second Clinton term, we had begun to recognize that we had to deal with China as an emerging major country. And we certainly couldn't simply look at it through a human rights lens or an economic lens, that we had to deal with it as the major country it was becoming. But that took time, and we didn't really cross that barrier until after I had left Beijing.